Now, if we talk about the IEP, it goes much further. The core of the IEP is what we call specialized instruction. I talked about that just a little bit a minute ago, but that's basically changing the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to meet the unique needs of the individual. So let's go back to our example of the child with ADD. If they have a mild case of ADD, maybe a 504 plan is sufficient, because maybe they just need front row seating or extra test time, and they can do fine. They can access the general curriculum and not have a problem. But if you have a student who has more severe ADD, maybe that's just not sufficient. Maybe they need a special education program. Maybe they need to be in a pull-out educational model where they get pulled out of the general education setting for some period of time during the day, and maybe there's a special education teacher that works with them, or maybe a couple students on academics or something else. Or maybe they need a behavior plan or other things. It's a matter of degree. So you can't say, well, you know, a child has disability X, they're always on a 504 plan, or child has disability Y and they're always on an IEP. It just depends. It depends on the severity of the child's disability. Also, a big difference between the IEP and the 504 plan is there are substantially more protections under the IEP. There's protections regarding assessments, when those assessments have to be done to qualify for an IEP, or every 3 years. There's timelines that apply to those assessments. And once the parent returns that signed assessment plan, the school has 60 days, 60 calendar days, to conduct all of the assessments and hold the IEP meeting. That is a procedural protection that's in the IDEA. It is not in a 504 plan. There's discipline procedures that we'll talk about later. There's parent notifications about the meetings, the IEP and assessments and so on and so forth. There's consent required to implement the IEP. So there's a lot more protections under an IEP. Again, it's a matter of what the child needs. Just because there's more protections doesn't mean you always want to shoot for an IEP. It's a matter of what the child needs. So I have here the bottom line, which is 504 plans are most appropriate when the student has a physical disability that does not directly interfere with his or her ability to learn. So with accommodations or modifications, they can access the general education setting just fine. However, when a student's disability is cognitive, emotional, academic, intellectual, developmental, a 504 plan is rarely adequate. Those kinds of students typically need that specialized instruction, something different than what's offered to the general education students, so they can benefit from their education. I have some tips, which is the 504 plan is not a consolation prize. And what I mean by that is the school should assess to determine whether the child qualifies for a 504 plan or an IEP. And if they don't qualify for an IEP, maybe the 504 plan is appropriate, but it shouldn't be just given as a backup because they didn't qualify for an IEP. You really have to look at carefully, does the child need an IEP, specialized instruction? And if they don't, do they need an accommodation plan? The other point is that if that child is on a 504 plan and it's not really working, the school thinks, oh, this is going to be fine. We'll do an accommodation plan and the accommodation should work. But let's just say over time, it's shown that that's not enough. The student needs more help. Then they should start assessing for an IEP. I've had situations in my practice where a student was on an IEP, they had ADHD, they had some behavior problems. They were on a 504 plan. And they had ADHD, they had behavior problems, and it didn't work. Month after month, the student was getting in trouble, sent to the office, suspended. Their scores were getting lower. They were falling further behind academically. And this didn't just happen for months, it actually happened for over a year. So the question becomes, at that point, should the school have noticed that and thought to themselves, look, maybe the student needs more help than the 504 plan can offer. And so that actually happened in that situation, that the student moved from a 504 plan to an IEP because they needed more help.